Hereby open the October 11th, 2017 regular business meeting of City Council. Mr. Hamp, lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I will. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'll remind those in attendance, if you wish to speak at the citizens' comment period tonight, there's a sign-up sheet in the back. First item of business is consideration of the consent agenda. Is there a motion to adopt it as presented?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Marks. Any other discussion? If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 4-0. Item 3 is, does members of City Council have anything they wish to present tonight?
I have a couple of comments, Mayor. I think we had a very nice event Saturday evening up on the former landfill, which is going to be the site of Sunset Park. If you had a chance to be there, you know how enjoyable it was, but the weather even treated us pretty good, and we were able to see something other than ourselves. And so I think it was a real good for the city. It gave some exposure to the planned park, and hopefully people that were there can speak to it positive. And I guess the other thing is I think we should acknowledge and congratulate our Economic Development Office, Tourism Office. I understand from reading papers last week that the city was the recipient of a couple of awards, which speaks highly of the staff, and which we have, I think, undoubtedly one of the best staffs any local government could have.
Thank you, sir.
And I guess it's been 2 weeks now, I attended a recreation event at Corner Springs, a kite flying family day, kind of speak, and it was very nice. Great weather. It's really nice to see a place for families to get together and recreate, and it was entertaining with the kite flyer there who made his kite do just about anything. And it was fun to see the demonstrations, have music, and the event was well attended and a lot of fun.
Thank you. Mr. Jones, I will say to your staff that worked the event up at Sunset Park, one outstanding job. You would think that they did that for a living instead of running around your office and taking care of details there, but they did an excellent job up there. Couldn't have not been any better.
Well, I've got, Mr. Mayor, I've got a few things to provide an update on. So the other week I attended the representative of the city at the Virginia Municipal League Conference in Williamsburg for about 3 days. It's a really interesting and I think important conference for the city in that the Virginia Municipal League is an advocacy organization representative of all Virginia cities, all Virginia towns, and a couple dozen counties as well. And so each year they kind of work on a legislative action item, an advocacy action item. And so in the spring I joined the Human Development and Education Committee, and in that capacity introduced a bill concept for the committee's consideration. And I'm pleased to report that it made it through the committee, made it through the Legislative Action Committee, brought to the full floor of the membership of the Virginia Municipal League. Not only was adopted as part of the legislative action docket, but was also moved forward as in the top 10 legislative priorities for this next legislative session. So what that means is taking these 13 ideas, and advancing them in a strong advocacy capacity with our Virginia legislators. So I thought I would just provide a quick summary of what that pilot program asks for. It's specific to school capital investments, and obviously we've got a large capital investment coming soon with our high school, as does the city of Stanton and many Virginia cities all over the Commonwealth. But in the same regard, there's this interest in our local tax base as as proud and as strong as it is, being able to continue to contribute to the Virginia economy. And when we leverage and we commit 10, 15, 30, millions of dollars that go into capital investments across the organization, when we do that, we limit our ability to continue to advocate and attract new businesses and compete for new businesses. And so the idea with this program is to create a pilot program through the legislature of about $300 million. That would be a competitive grant program for a 2-year pilot program could look at a $10 million grant for a community based off of a competitive grant program. So just for the record, it says local governments pay the majority of public school capital cost. Communities struggle to balance financing the infrastructure and operational costs for 21st century learning environments with other public infrastructure and service needs. The Literary Fund long ago lost its capacity as a viable financing option for most communities' school capital cost. VML supports new avenues for funding public school construction and renovation costs, including the creation of a pilot program of competitive grants using funds from the Virginia Public Building Authority to offset new construction or renovation costs for publicly owned and operated K-12 schools. So we're meeting with our local delegates here in the next month or so. We'll continue to, I think, advocate for that, and we'll look for everyone's assistance and leadership in that. That was really great. I'd also add that one of the best presentations, was a sobering presentation, but looking at the state resources and the needs for investments across a wide range, from opioid addictions and additional support for our great teachers throughout the Commonwealth, and the challenge. And so one of the elements that came out of that was a fiscal stress analysis of identifying physical stress through cities across the Commonwealth. So that was very informative, and I'll be sure to forward you all a copy of that report. It was a really informative, and I'll share that on my Facebook page too. Just really for folks that want some light reading at night. It was actually really, really interesting. So there's that. I'd also add there was some folks, different topic. There's been some conversation about diversity and inclusion training and equal opportunity training in the city, actually across our region. I just wanted to share publicly that our organization actually completed a citywide workforce diversity and inclusion training last October and November. We have our directors and department heads undergoing equal opportunity training right now. So I just thought I'd share that information for folks that the city is very proud of that, and I'm certainly proud that we're doing that. Would offer that we're continuing to have very positive and productive meetings with our school board about education in Waynesboro and the high school project, and look forward to continuing that strong and cooperative meeting discussion that we're having. And then lastly is that so there's some folks kind of going around and talking about. I attended so I live in the Tree Streets, and the Tree Streets when I first moved, we had a little community neighborhood association, and it worked for we had some desserts, very tasty, and that lasted for a couple of years, and like anything, in life, it sort of fell apart. But there's been sort of this renaissance in the past year or so with neighbors kind of getting together, and I attended a really awesome meeting of 20, 30 families or people at a neighbor's house in the Tree Streets over the weekend on Friday. And this topic came up about the Greenway Phase 3 going through there, and some misinformation that's kind of circulating in the community. And then when I got home today, I got a little pamphlet on my door, and so I thought I'd ask Mr. Hamp to maybe provide sort of an update of that Phase 3, so we can kind of make sure that we're working with the right and accurate information to the greatest extent possible. I know Council had an update for the grant application that we applied for back in October, which we were successful at receiving, and but just to there's a lot of folks going around and asking questions. I thought it would be helpful if you could provide a summary of where we're at.
Sure. There was actually some public discussion and staff presentation on the concept of this linkage from the current trailhead behind the YMCA, the Rife Loth trailhead, linking to Ridgeview Park. And we actually engaged a group of graduate students, CDACs. It's the Community Design Assistance Center associated with Virginia Tech, and they worked with our staff to develop some concepts and some potential and alternative routes, again, linking essentially from the YMCA to Ridgeview Park. And so there were several public meetings with those folks and the concepts that they had developed. As Mr. Short mentioned, in October of last year, the staff presented formally to council concepts regarding that project and sought a resolution endorsing the staff's application to VDOT for a TAP grant that was actually intended to furnish only the design and initial engineering. Somewhat to our surprise, we were informed that the VDOT staff had identified a different source of funding and provided sufficient funds to not only design but construct the project. And in that regard, at least internally, the opportunity has gained some momentum. And I think what may help clarify the public conversation and conversations between elected officials and constituents is that while the project is described as a greenway, it consists essentially of 4 components, much of which don't reflect or replicate specifically the greenway as we know it along the South River. That really the project involves a safer pedestrian crossing at the intersection of Wayne Avenue, Arch Avenue, and Rife Road. That's one significant component, objective that the staff hope to achieve with the project. Then through a series of sidewalks, improvements to existing sidewalks, bike lanes, and share rows make safer and better defined pedestrian connection from, say, that Rife Road, Arch Avenue crossing up to the entrance of what's known as Cliffside Drive. It's an alley essentially off of Oak Avenue that links Oak Avenue to Ridgeview Park. And then a third component is, or a fourth component, are improvements and trail linkages that occur at the landing of that alley in Ridgeview Park in the vicinity of the Babe Ruth and Little League baseball field. And so it may be helpful also to recall that our master plan for a greenway system in our community expresses specifically an objective to link neighborhoods, public parks, and even the downtown area, and acknowledges that in some cases those linkages won't occur with a traditional greenway type facility, but will rely on sidewalks, off-road trails, bike lanes, etc., to accomplish a complete network or a system that contains both traditional greenway elements that we're enjoying presently along the river, but also safer pedestrian and better defined pedestrian linkages in currently developed residential areas. We've not yet received a funding agreement or a project agreement from the funder, and so when that occurs, I would imagine there will be an additional engineering and survey examination, an opportunity for the public to express preferences. In all candor, probably not an input session in which the public can define specifically routes, but comment on alternative routes and give staff feedback. And to the greatest extent possible, we would seek to incorporate preferences from the community, and especially the Tree Street neighborhood, which is would potentially be the host for the facility. I think it's also helpful to know that the majority of improvements in the proposed project occur on city-owned land or in the public right-of-way. That's not to say that there won't be situations in which we might need to negotiate an easement or an acquisition, but largely the project is accomplished on city-owned land in the public right-of-way.
Okay, that's super helpful. Because a couple of things that the people that I've heard people have asked is One, to clarification that there aren't wholesale, we're not going out there ripping out bushes and tearing down trees. Again, largely accomplished within the public right-of-way.
Correct.
That'd be an accurate statement, okay. The second is, well, why don't we just follow the river? And the way I've answered that question is because we'd have to basically build a structure. The cliff side, the cliff that exists, the embankment as it is along the river, does not sort of allow itself for a greenway, because there's basically condos kind of built right up on top of it. I mean, would that be?
Well, I think to a certain extent that's true. I would say that in 2013, when we had the public meetings with CDAX, part of that conversation occurred around a route along the river. And one of the challenges that we have with this opportunity and with previous and other existing opportunities is that you have to work with property owners to acquire easement, multiple property owners to acquire easement, and you look for successful and easier accomplishable opportunities. And again, in this case, it occurs largely in publicly owned property and makes it a simpler proposition. I wouldn't say an easy proposition, but a simpler proposition, especially with respect to easement and property ownership.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else?
That's all I have, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 4 is to receive information from Gary Kretzer, Director of Emergency Management, regarding proposed changes to the City Code, Chapter 28, Section 5, service fees for ambulance transport. Mr. Hamp, do you want to add anything before?
Yes, so really quickly, a procedural matter for council's benefit. So in items 4A and 4B, staff will present information prompted in part by a request from council members to address circumstances and improve service, improve schedules. And so the process will be staff will present information and context and recommendations tonight. We'll seek general guidance, and if council confirms that they'd like to move forward, either as recommended or with amended recommendations, we'll schedule the material and prepare ordinances for a subsequent meeting. If council hears the information and says this is not for us at the present time, we'd appreciate that, knowing that at this point, if you're able to communicate it, and we will not schedule the matters for subsequent meetings.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, Mr. Hamp, Mr. Shaw, thank you for the opportunity to spend a few minutes with you this evening to talk about EMS revenue recovery. This is a program that's been in place for a number of years, and I'll provide you a little history and some of the reasons that we're here tonight talking to you about it. Everybody see that okay? Or we need to dim the lights in?
Yeah.
So if we talk about how we got where we are today, it all started in really in early 2005 that culminated in a new chapter of city code being enacted by this body in December of 2005, Chapter 28, with respect to emergency medical services. Tonight, we're going to speak specifically about Section 5 of that code section as it relates to EMS billing, or more commonly known as revenue recovery. Prior to that date, and for a long time, since 1951, EMS in our community has predominantly been provided by the all-volunteer Waynesboro First Aid Crew. Unfortunately, due to the impacts that all volunteer organizations feel, over time, they transitioned from an organization that was totally dependent upon volunteers and totally dependent upon community support into one that required support from career personnel and staffing. Also, it became more and more difficult to raise funds sufficient to operate that organization, and we landed in the situation we did in December of 2005. It was strongly recommended by other local governments that I spoke with that we enacted an ordinance that regulated the delivery of EMS in our community, that provided us control over how services were delivered. Some communities choose not to do that. And the ones that haven't have found themselves occasionally in some predicaments that this particular ordinance sets to prevent. So we researched billing practices used by other localities around the Commonwealth, as well as what was allowable by CMS, or the Centers for Medicaid Services. We bill based on a tiered structure level. We bill based on what levels of provider are on the scene, what levels of service are provided. So there's three in particular: ALS level 1, or advanced life support level 1, advanced life support level 2, and basic life support. Plus the patient is billed per loaded mile. So however long that transport is from the scene of the incident to the receiving medical facility. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a couple minutes. Currently, City Code only allows for billing of transported patients. And if it's a patient that doesn't get transported, or it's a patient refusal, we cannot bill for that. Furthermore, we're only allowed to bill primary health insurance in terms of insurance billing. We can balance bill the patient. We can bill a patient entirely for the amount if they don't have insurance, but the only insurance currently allowed to be billed by our code is health insurance. And again, balance billing is allowed for copays and deductibles, and full billing for non-insured. And we have the ability through our code section, and this is done today, that we can write off any out-of-pocket expenses if they meet federal poverty guidelines. So there's a form that's sent to the individual. They complete that form and send it back to the billing company, and the billing company, once that information is verified, can write off any out-of-pocket expenses. First and foremost, service is not based on the ability to pay. They dial 911, an ambulance is sent, and service is delivered. There's never any question about, can you pay the bill, or how are you going to pay it, or here's our credit card machine. It's all about giving the service first and collecting the revenue down the road. Okay? We currently use a soft billing approach. There's no aggressive collections. Essentially, they offer two bills. They include the poverty form in it, and at the end of that second billing, if they haven't received payment, it's done. Okay, so we use a soft billing approach. More so in EMS today, that process has gradually changed, much like the rest of the healthcare industry is, and we'll talk more about that in just a few minutes. They also offered an annual subscription program. If a household paid $50 a year, everyone in that household was covered for any out-of-pocket expenses. They would still bill their health insurance, but if there was a copay or deductible, then they wouldn't receive a bill for that amount. In talking with their billing company, that program has received actually rather lukewarm response. There are very few people that have taken advantage of the subscription program. So how is the EMS funded in Waynesboro currently? Understanding that the Waynesboro First Aid Crew is not an actual part of city government. They're recognized by us, they're endorsed by us, and allowed to operate as a licensed EMS agency in Virginia and in Waynesboro by requirements of the Office of EMS, but they're not a city department. So their predominant way that they receive funds to operate is based on EMS billing or revenue recovery. They also receive some support through our annual budget. They receive a $50,000 annual contribution from the city towards their operations. We also receive every year through the Virginia Office of EMS and the 4 for Life program, which is $4 of every motor vehicle registered in that's registered in the city of Waynesboro. 26% of that amount comes back to the local government. We have to use that for a nonprofit licensed EMS agency in the locality for EMS training, for supplies, and for equipment. Specifically says that in the Code of Virginia, and they cannot be supplanting funds, so they can't be used to supplant a budget or supplant a contribution. So we can use those how we choose as long as we meet the Code of Virginia. Currently, we choose to pass those funds through, and we give those to the rescue squad to use to offset their expenses. Currently, that's about $19,000. It fluctuates based on the number of motor vehicles that are re-registered every year that are registered in the city of Waynesboro. We also fund their Line of Duty Act benefits. About 4 years ago, the General Assembly, which had always paid for the line of duty fund, chose to hand that off to the localities. So we were responsible then for picking up the Line of Duty Death Act contribution for all of our employees: police, fire, sheriff's office, emergency management, and then you have the rescue squad or the first aid crew in that situation. Some localities elected to require the volunteer agencies to pick that cost up themselves. We chose to include them in our entire package, and we pay that contribution for them. Currently, it's about $3,500 to $4,000 a year. That fluctuates based on the number of active members and employees that would fit into that category. We also provide and own all the radio communication system in the city, and we provide their radio equipment and any maintenance to it that occurs during the year. I did some numbers today, and that's around somewhere in the neighborhood of a couple $1,000s a year because we already own all the capital equipment. So if you look at all that added up and you take out that $19,000 state pass-through, we fund essentially about 1.4 FTEs for them. That's based on an hourly rate of $15 an hour plus benefits. They currently employ career staff to provide 24-hour-a-day EMS care. When they started EMS billing in 2006, they were predominantly volunteer. They hired a handful of career folks to supplement the volunteers. Unfortunately, much like is seen all over the country, that made a flip several years later, and now they're predominantly a career organization supported by volunteers. So they've made that transition. They provide 2 full career staffed ambulances 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Community donations are still coming into them, fortunately. They still have a very minimal fundraising campaign once a year, and they generate about $58,000 in 2016. So that's the money that they receive to be able to support their budget and operate their organization. Their current rate structure for billing, our code allows them to bill usual and customary fees allowed by insurance plus no more than 10%. That's the way our code language currently reads. So for a basic life support ambulance transport, currently their fee is $447. That gets them a EMT level crew, basic life support, and an ambulance and anything those providers would do for them en route to the hospital and at the scene. They would also be billed for their mileage at $14 per loaded mile, which is allowed by the Centers for Medicaid Services. If they have an advanced life support situation, there are 2 levels, meaning that a paramedic or another advanced life support provider had to provide care to them. The basic level of advanced life support is advanced life support level 1, and that means that they get some drugs, maybe 1 or 2 drugs. They might get a cardiac monitoring, a 12-lead EKG, but it's pretty limited care. They might get an IV established. It's $531. Advanced life support level 2, essentially they have to throw the drug box at them. They have to get 3 or more drugs and 2 or more procedures. They may get an advanced airway like an endotracheal tube. They may get other procedures done, but they really required critical care in the field. They may have had to be defibrillated and other things, and that cost is $768. That's what's billed to insurance. Again, that also includes the $14 per loaded mile, meaning the patient is in the ambulance from the scene to the receiving facility. All of their billing is currently handled by a company out of Stanton known as Emergency Services Support, LLC. And it's a unique situation in that it's a limited partnership that's owned predominantly by the Waynesboro First Aid Crew and the Stanton Augusta Rescue Squad. They own it, and they take a percentage off the top of their revenue to pay for the billing company. They've also have an associate member with Highland County that helps to offset some of that expense. So instead of using a large third-party biller, they have their own billing company, which helps to keep expenses low. So the status of where things are today is that gradually we've seen a decline in their revenues. And that's happened for several reasons. One is that their service area outside of the city has decreased significantly over the last 10 years. Back when I joined in 1975, we had a footprint that ran all the way to Crozet because there was no Western Albemarle Rescue Squad, all the way to the west to Woodrow Wilson Rehab Center, to the top of Love Mountain, and all the way almost to Grottoes to the north. That's dramatically changed, and their footprint has been really reeled in. They don't even run the Fishersville area anymore because the county has placed career staff in the majority of those stations. So they still cover a small percentage of Augusta County. They cover down 340 towards Cremora, but not quite to Cremora any longer. They cover to the south up Lyndhurst Road, Mount Tory Road, just shy of the Sharando Grocery there at 610. And they cover out 254 a little short distance. But the majority of their county response area has been absorbed by county resources. So that's decreased their call volume pretty significantly. And as of year to date, as of today, their dispatches are down 348 compared to this same time last year. Also, there's been a decline in collection per call from the insurance. And that's happened for a couple of reasons. One is that more and more insurance companies have changed deductibles and copays for ambulance transport. Previously, it used to be a lot of insurers would pay the 100% for an ambulance transport. Gradually, that's transitioned. For example, ours here, our Aetna insurance, it's a $100 deductible, and then they cover the remainder of the cost for the transport. Some places it's higher than that. It just depends on the insurer and what the contracts are for that particular area. So there's also, with the decrease in the county responses, meaning longer distance traveled to the hospital, there's been less mileage reimbursement. So they've seen a decrease in revenue, and I'll show you some numbers here in just a moment. They've also had a gradual increase in expenses. I talked a few moments ago about the change in their manpower status from a volunteer organization to a volunteer organization supported by career to a career organization supported by volunteers. So they now have a number of career staff, full-time staff, and part-time staff that they have to pay salary and benefits to. So about 2/3 of the revenue that they collect from revenue recovery goes towards salary and benefits for employees, okay? Equipment costs. In the day, and I'll pick on our mayor, Bruce remembers when we did this as young folks in the rescue squad, an ambulance you could buy brand new for about $35,000. An ambulance today with nothing on it is about $180,000 to $200,000. That doesn't include any of the equipment. A cardiac monitor, defibrillator is about $34,000. A CPR machine is about $10,000, and the numbers go on and on. And there's lots of durable medical equipment and disposable medical equipment that's carried and required to be carried on an ambulance. These units are like mobile emergency rooms. Paramedics can do lots of things in the field that can be also done in the hospital, but it saves times and it saves lives, but it's expensive, just like everything else in the healthcare industry. So if you combine those two items, their revenues decline, their expenses increase, and they're having some issues meeting budget. If you look at, this is a 5-year comparison on billing versus collection. The orangey colored bars represent what they actually billed to health insurance, and the gray bar represents what they've actually collected. So if you look, there's been a gradual decline. This year so far, year to date, they're at about $695,000, and they've billed over 1.3. And that's pretty standard, unfortunately, in our healthcare world today. We all complain about these exorbitant healthcare costs, but they're inflated to offset what insurance companies will and won't pay. And we see the exact same thing in EMS reimbursement. So for considerations for you this evening to think about in terms of how can we help them solve this problem is allow the thought of billing alternative insurances that have medical coverage. So if you have a situation where someone is uninsured and they're involved in a motor vehicle accident, most motor vehicle policies, if they have vehicle insurance, have a medical coverage on it. Can they bill an alternative insurance to get that reimbursement for that ambulance transport? Can they bill a homeowner's insurance for medical coverage if there's no other way, there's no health insurance or any other supplemental insurance plans? Currently, we say they can bill health insurance. So we're asking for your consideration of the possibility of billing alternative insurances in addition to health care insurance. Also, this is being done not only in our region, but throughout Virginia and throughout the country, is that because of the sophisticated treatment that we give, there are oftentimes situations where patients are not transported to the hospital, and I'll give you a couple examples in just a moment. We also have a lot of situations where there are patient refusals. Now, they're a lot different than where we get called to a motor vehicle accident, and today with cell phones, we often get 10 or 15 911 calls for the same accident. And they're unable to tell us for sure whether anybody's injured or not, so we have to dispatch fire and EMS along with law enforcement. And the EMS gets there and determines everybody's out of the car, nobody has any injuries, there's no patient-provider contact, so there is no contact. That's not a patient refusal. We don't have to get any documentation. We don't sign any refusal paperwork. There's no injuries. We go back in service and we go home and we just record the incident. That's not a patient refusal. A patient refusal is they go to that accident and there's somebody with a head injury and there's a seatbelt injury or an arm injury, and they get assessed. They get their vital signs taken. They get checked out. They may get advised to go to the hospital, and they choose to say, no, I don't want to get transported. I'll call my family doctor later. I don't want to go to the hospital, and they'll sign a medical refusal against medical advice saying, I don't want to be treated. In that case, there's consideration. It's being done in our region. It's being done across the state, is you bill for that patient refusal. Average somewhere in the $75 to $100 range for a patient refusal. Again, you've tied up $180,000 to $200,000 piece of equipment and staff that needs to be reimbursed in some fashion. The other is assessment, treatment, and refusal and release. A good example of this is you get dispatched for an unresponsive diabetic patient, an insulin-dependent diabetic. And that happens fairly frequently. And we get there and the patient's unresponsive and they check their blood pressure and they check their blood sugar. Sometimes they'll start an IV and they'll give them a bolus of dextrose in their vein, and the patient miraculously wakes up. And they're happy as a clam and they say, oh, I took my insulin this morning and I forgot to eat. And that's why my blood sugar dropped, and I'm fine. I'll call my family doctor. I'm going to get some food here and I'm going to eat. And I don't want to go to the hospital. Well, they just tied up that unit, that equipment. They opened a drug box. There are lots of costs associated with that. They sign a refusal and they go back in service. Currently in the region, they are billing, and this is pretty standard in the industry, for assessment, treatment, and refusal or release about $350. And the last is billing for prolonged standbys. What I mean by prolonged is not that they provide a resource for a standby and they're there 10 minutes and they turn around and leave. I'm talking about a prolonged standby where they might, a good example might be a large working fire where it takes 2 or 3 ambulances and they're there for 2 or 3 hours, is that they can bill homeowners insurance to help cover the cost of that standby. Also is the consideration for a collections policy. Instead of a soft billing where we send 2 bills and we say, okay, well, they're just not going to pay, that's the end of it, is that we change that policy to be much like the rest of the healthcare industry, where we allow for collections to occur, much like we do for our water bills and other things where people don't pay. is that we attempt to collect. We determine if they have the means to pay. If they don't, we encourage them to fill out a poverty form, and the bill gets written off if it can be verified. On the other hand, if they've got insurance and their insurance is paid, but they just don't want to pay their copay or deductible, then a more aggressive approach using the collections process would take place to recover that money. The Stanton Augusta Rescue Squad already does that in Stanton, and they have a 67% collection rate from those with commercial insurance using a collections policy. Currently, the Waynesboro First Aid Crew has a 48% collection rate without a collections policy. So there's some additional revenue to be collected there, an anticipated 10% increase in revenue if we use that approach is what our billing company is anticipating initially. And these practices, both the billing for alternative insurances, the billing for areas outside of transport, and the collections process are already being used by our other neighboring rescue squad and has created an increased revenue stream for them. Prior to this, 13% of SARS patient refusals were billable, and of those billed, not prior, but now, 13% of those patient refusals are now billable, and of those, 37% were able to be collected, so they've generated additional revenue. In summary, decreased call volume and decreased collection from expense with insurers has created a financial strain on their organization. Our current code language prevents billing for other insurances. It prevents us from doing any type of collection process, and our proposed code changes will allow alternate practices to occur with an anticipated increase in revenue. The Waynesboro First Aid Crew, being our primary transport agency, saves the city and our taxpayers considerable money each year. We've looked at the numbers if we had to operate that organization ourselves, and it would be significant. So we're proposing this to allow them to continue to generate the revenues to be able to be solvent and function as they should. With that, I'm open to any questions that you might have.
Questions?
One question I had was the SARS collection. So when they the 67% collection rate, is that still in-house in terms of the billing, or do y'all are they outsourced?
They use a third. They will try to collect it with their billing company first, and then they go to a third-party collection agency to try to collect that.
Okay.
What I got from their billing company is they've only had to be aggressive and what I mean by aggressive is take legal action to get their money back in 7 cases to date.
Anything else?
What I would like to know, I saw the charts with your billing and collections, and they're significantly different. But what I'd like to know, have a better idea of what actually is the net losses each year or profits each year from the way we do things now.
I can get you that information.
I would like to see that.
That can be obtained for you, and I'll send it to Mr. Hamp.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Gary, I don't know if you know this or can answer this, but does the state code of Virginia have anything to say about what's being proposed or what's allowable?
It leaves it to the jurisdiction. Yeah, it's our decision. We can choose. We don't even have to have a code section. We could allow them to do whatever they wanted to. That's been advised against by many of our counterparts across the state, other governments that have found that you really need to have that structure and you need to be able to control what's going on, as well as if you look at the whole code section, we have a permit process, et cetera, because without that, you can suddenly have a lot of folks coming into your jurisdiction that want to operate EMS for profit. So that's why we have the code section that we do. There is code language in the Virginia Code that makes us ultimately responsible for the delivery of EMS. Now, we can choose how we do that, and we've chosen to do that through the mechanism of the Waynesboro First Aid Crew.
Well, Gary, I can say one thing. you explained it extremely well, and I
Very
don't
well.
think you left out much. And to look at the expenses that are increasing with the amount that's coming in going down, and if we would, if you'd have said the number tonight that it would cost the city to provide that service on its own totally, people would probably fall out of their chairs. So thank you, and I think you give us a lot of positive things to look at here, and we're not making a decision tonight, but I know which way I would go. Thank you very much.
And I'll be happy to give you that number if you want to know what it is.
No, I don't. I still have
We
to
don't
eat
want
sup-
people
I
to
still have
fall
to
out of
eat
their
supper
chairs.
tonight.
I've got copies of, the rescue squad is now doing a quarterly newsletter, and I will make sure that you get electronic copies of this. Every time it comes out, it talks about what they're doing.
Go back to the speaker.
And also with us tonight.
Go back to the speaker so they can hear you at home.
I'll have to call 911. Also with us tonight are Ashley Cook, he's the president of the First Aid Crew, and John Howard, who is their new executive director. And there's a little article in that newsletter about John and his background and where he comes from. So they're with us tonight. And do you gentlemen have any comments you'd like to make?
You were doing real good, Gary.
I'm sorry.
Gary?
I don't want to take up any more of your time, but I do want to say thank you for looking into this. This is an important matter that we have looked at, and we do feel that if we don't make some changes in the near future, the way that we provide services could potentially change. And we want to ensure that we continue to meet our mission statement to provide the best services to our citizens, throughout Waynesboro and portions of Augusta County.
Well, Ashley, the only thing I can say, once again, your face has been here for many, many years throughout the First Aid Crew, and that's some of the continuity for the best services that we have here. And thank you for your service. John, your face has been around for a long time. Glad you're here. And y'all just keep up the excellent job, and we'll try to do our part to help y'all as much as we can.
Thank you. And I also would like to thank Gary for his time and efforts that he's spent to collect the data for us and to present what he presented tonight.
Yeah.
He's a keeper.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great presentation.
Thank you, gentlemen. All right, we'll move on to item 4B, which is to receive information from Mary Garris, the city assessor, regarding proposed changes to the city code.
We'll go directly to Mary.
Let's do that.
And I don't need the slideshow. So, good evening, council, Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor. I'm here tonight just to discuss two quick things with you. One is supplemental billing, and one are just a few ordinance changes. Right now, in the state of Virginia, localities have the option. They're authorized to have supplemental billing. And what that is basically, right now in Waynesboro, we bill as of January 1st each year. With supplemental billing, we could pick up new construction of real estate and additions to properties for the percent of the year that they're actually substantially complete. So in researching supplemental billing amongst other localities in Virginia, we reached out to 26 localities. We only got information back from 11, but of those 11, 9 supplemented, and not one of those said, no, we wouldn't do it. At the end of the day, it's not going to cost us any more money to do it. We're not going to need more staff. We're out in the field picking up the new construction anyway. Just as it stands now, we wouldn't bill anything we pick up this year until next year. Supplemental billing is worthy of consideration for reasons of revenue generation, fairness, and equity amongst our constituents. And with that being said, this is what we need to consider, and this is where the equity comes in. Right now, let's say I build a house in a subdivision and I build it this summer. I'm in for Christmas, my family enjoys Christmas in our new house, and we start getting billed next year. My next door neighbor, they start a house after me with Thanksgiving, Christmas, hunting season, the weather and whatnot. Let's say the only thing their contractor gets done for this year by the end of the year is a foundation. So January 1st, they're going to get billed for that foundation only. However, things pick up, weather's nice, so let's say they're in the house by March. I enjoyed my house at Christmas. I'm paying from January 1st until December 31st of 2018. My neighbor who moved in the end of March, first part of April, they're there for the rest of the year. They're enjoying all the services that I'm enjoying by living in Waynesboro for the rest of the year, but they're only paying for the entire year on that foundation. With supplemental billing, we could pick up that portion of the year the house was complete, so they would pay their portion of taxes from May until December. Just an idea with commercial construction, for an example, one property in Waynesboro last year, on the last day of the year, the only thing there was concrete slab. So they were assessed all year for the building only, not including the land. We're leaving that out just for math purposes, for $53,500. They were open for operation by April. So from May till December, they're receiving all the city services. They're open for business. Everything's running normally. And we're taxing them for concrete slab for all of 2017. If we could have picked up the building, it would have been an additional $2,487 in tax. That's just laying on the table. We've picked it up. We have it on the books. We just can't tax it because we don't currently have an ordinance for supplemental billing. To date, the assessor's office has picked up $4.7, almost $4.8 million for 2017 in new construction. Of that, we could have supplemented $2.4 million, which is an additional $21,000 plus in tax revenue. Now, we just found out that's not going to buy us an ambulance, but it'll put a dent in a defibrillator. So if the decision is made to pursue supplemental billing, we have some administrative matters that still need to be ironed out. We need to work with the treasurer, the commissioner, and IT. We're in the process of rolling out new software in the city. So we want to make sure that the timing of that is conducive to the portions of software that are being rolled out, that we don't spend money that doesn't need to be spent for programming purposes to get it out tomorrow if it's better suited to come out 6 months from now or maybe a year from now. We would want to look into that, as well as when the ordinance is written. If we have it written and ready by January 1st, do we do it all of the 2018? Or if we wouldn't have an ordinance prepared until February, does it need to wait and start in 2019? So that's that for your consideration. The other thing I have is just basically some cleanup. Currently, our city ordinance, well, in 2015, there were some changes to code, and we came to council, and we had the city ordinance updated to reflect those changes. One thing that was changed was in 78-34. It's the language about how our reassessment notices are to look when we mail those out. Well, basically what we did when we put that section of code in was mirrored the state code. That happens to be a section of state code that comes up almost every time in General Assembly. It's got date and time issues in it. So what we've done with this is just basically said that all of our notices regarding reassessment will go out in accordance with state code. So you leave out all the dates that may possibly get changed during legislation, General Assembly, but we still have to send it in accordance with state code, which we already do. We just don't have to come to you every time they change a date and try to get this all fixed again. The second part is 78-38, hearings before the assessor and Board of Equalization. Previously, we didn't have anything in the ordinance regarding hearings before the assessor. So we added that in so our constituents know that's an option. And as far as the Board of Equalization hearings, that's the biggest change. What has happened is with the state code, when you send out notices, you can't have hearings until 15 days after notices are mailed. Then you have hearings for a certain amount of time. Then with the way the city code was written, we couldn't have Board of Equalization hearings until 30 days after our administrative hearings were done. And then you have to wait another 45 days for this for the state and 15 for that. And what it does is it pushes us all the way up until the end of May for our Board of Equalization hearings. You guys are trying to get through budget times, figure that all out. The treasurer and the commissioner are trying to get the land book run, and it just pushes everybody right up to the very end trying to get everything calculated. Other localities, what they do is they have Board of Equalization within 30 days of those Board of Assessor hearings or administrative hearings rather than 30 days after. So we're not trying to, our intent is not for someone to not have an opportunity for Board of Equalization, but just back that time up a little bit so we can get all that complete and to the treasurer and commissioner in a timely manner. And the last thing is just a change in title. We had appealing assessments. However, that section of the city ordinance or code was all about the right to appeal to circuit court. It didn't have anything to do with appealing the assessments to our office or Board of Equalization, so that is a title change only. So all that is just for your consideration, something to think about, and I'm available for any questions.
Any questions?
Yes, so the, for the supplemental billing, if we didn't get it completed by January 1, we would have to wait till 2019.
That's what we need to find out. If we wouldn't have the ordinance in place by January 1st,
Okay, I didn't
if we have the ordinance drafted and adopted in February, we would need to find out if we can begin, because we wouldn't have mailed any bills at that point. The bills would go out with the second half tax bill for whatever amount they're supplemented on. You do not supplement, when you do supplemental billing, you do not supplement anything picked up in the months of November and December. You only go through October. So what we would do is any supplemental bills, the property owners would be notified that they're going to be receiving one in advance, so they know to plan for that, but they would not get it until fall.
Okay. And I would just to add that to just commend you and appreciate your hard work and diligence at kind of bringing this subject forward to
Thank
us
you.
and leadership in that regard. So it's much appreciated. So
Done?
I'm done.
Okay. Anything else?
I'd just like to echo what the Vice Mayor said, Ms. Garris. Appreciate your
Thank you.
looking into this and providing us with something to think about as far as enhancing the city's revenues.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you. If you have any other questions, just call me.
Item 5A is to consider adopting a resolution in support of an application to VDOT for $281,000 revenue sharing funds for the reconstruction of A Street Bridge. Mr. Shaw.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, if it's acceptable to you, I'm going to try to cover the briefing for all three resolutions at one time, and then we can walk through each resolution individually if you'd like to take them up.
Works for me.
I think the council has some familiarity with the Virginia Department of Transportation's revenue sharing program. We've been a recipient of revenue sharing grant funds, and we've made applications in recent years for those funds. VDOT provides these funds to construct, reconstruct, improve, or maintain local highway systems. The local funds are matched dollar for dollar with state funds, with a $10 million limit on the amount of state funds authorized per locality. And these funds are intended to provide money to immediately improve or supplement existing projects, with the expectation that projects are generally in active development and leading to completion within the near term. The revenue sharing program applications are due on November 1st. The council does have some time to pass the resolutions. We have 3 applications that we'd like you to consider and we'll discuss tonight. One, I believe this council should be familiar with because we made application last year, an unsuccessful application to the revenue sharing program last year for the replacement of the A Street Bridge. And by way of orientation, this is Route 340 North Delphine, and then you've got B Street over to A Street. This is Steele's Run, and this is where the bridge is located. A little closer view, again, A Street. The bridge is located here.
I think we're all familiar with that.
Yep.
We've been down there and looked at it, so.
So this is your bridge, and it consists of 6 36-inch barrels. The bridge is in some state of deterioration as we speak. Our most recent bridge reports listed it in fair condition. We would replace this with a VDOT standard cast-in-place culvert. The bridge is also listed as one of your top 10 stormwater projects. You can see the deterioration of the end wall of the bridge. And you can see the bridge is located in this vicinity. There's the guardrail of the bridge during a flooding event. So again, there's a transportation structural issue to be addressed here, as well as a stormwater issue to be addressed. We've done some recent engineering on the replacement cost of the bridge, and it's estimated to cost $562,000. And again, in the revenue sharing program, the City Council would be responsible for half of that, or $281,000. We do have some existing surplus stormwater bond proceeds. I would estimate we have a project that's kicking off now. Once that one's done, I can give you a more exact estimate, but I would say somewhere around $80,000 or $90,000 that we could devote to the project. The second project is the reconstruction of...
Can I ask you a question on that?
Certainly.
We're going to do the same work we had talked about doing before, and would it be where we're going to do half the bridge, keep half open, and
Yes.
pretty much the same,
Exactly.
same layout?
We have a little more detailed engineering, but the same approach, same location. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
The second project that we're proposing would be to reconstruct a section of North Delphine Avenue between Maryland Avenue and George Avenue. Here's Hopeman Parkway. This section of North Delphine is considered an urban minor arterial route and carries about 8,100 vehicle trips a day. The city's Public Works Division has a sophisticated pavement management system that prioritizes the maintenance of roads. And our effort is essentially to mill and repave the surface of roads before they deteriorate to a state that the road has to be reconstructed. I think you're aware that roads are built with a base material of aggregate and stone, and then a layer of asphalt. And asphalt is a pliable material. It can become brittle. It shrinks and swells with temperature and is deteriorated by the friction and weight of traffic. So this stretch carries a fair amount of truck traffic, and the evidence of deterioration that goes into the subbase is pretty clear in the stretch of road. So we do have what we would consider to be roads that are reaching that failure in the city, about 1.5 miles of roadway that we would say has gone beyond the ability to simply mill and repave and would need to be reconstructed. So this would take care of about 0.8 of a mile of roadway, and at a cost of approximately $420,000. And so the city council would be responsible for $210,000. And the final project would be to...
So just confirm, so that's going to maintain the same cross-section, same number of lanes, some everything?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
The final project that we would propose to the council is to complete a 500-foot stretch of sidewalk along Windy Grove Drive. And basically, something we've done in the last several years is to evaluate the sidewalks throughout the city with a special emphasis on the area around Rosser Avenue, Ludwig Boulevard intersections, and looking at areas where there are existing sidewalks, where sidewalks are planned. The city actually has some revenue sharing money to complete a stretch of sidewalk on Lucy Lane this year. DuPont Community Credit Union completed a stretch of sidewalk. We had some sidewalk built on Lucy Lane with the Logan's Roadhouse restaurant. And so we're looking to complete other stretches of sidewalk in the area. Ultimately, we would like to create pedestrian crossings as well. We had negotiated an activated pedestrian crossing here at Lucy Lane and Rosser Avenue with the development proposal of the Ladd School project. As you're aware, that particular project is not going to occur, but it would be our intention to maintain our position that the developer of that property would create that activated crossing. So this is a tricky area to create activated crossings because of the number of signal lights. If you have a pedestrian crossing, activated crossing, then all of the signals have to be timed in tandem, and it certainly slows down vehicular traffic, or potential to slow down vehicular traffic. So at this point, the Public Works Division simply is trying to knock out sidewalk. The other issue is that if you have pedestrian crossings, then you have to have landing spots for folks. And in other words, you have to have sidewalks to walk to the crossing and from the crossing. So we've proposed this 500-foot section of sidewalk. The total cost would be $80,000. We would be responsible for $40,000. So again, the three projects we proposed would be replacement of the A Street Bridge, reconstruction of a section of North Delphine Avenue, and a section of sidewalk on Windy Grove Drive. The total city share for those three projects is $511,000. I think we could apply somewhere between $80,000 and $90,000 to the A Street Bridge replacement project. And so the city council would be responsible for something in the neighborhood of about $420,000 that would have to either be raised in the next fiscal year or come through some sort of reserve funds or borrowed money.
Thank you, Mr. Scholes. Anybody have questions? Not?
The money we have to come up with, we have to raise, you just said in your last statement. But I was just wondering, where does this plan fit in with the needs for the already needed Florence Bridge?
That Florence Bridge is already funded. That VDOT has transferred money from that remained from the North Delphine widening project and some other revenue sharing funds that were already in the city to Florence Avenue. So that project is funded.
So now our wait is what exactly?
I'm sorry?
What is the next,
as far as when that bridge? We would expect engineering to be completed during the late fall of this year, and that we would take the project to bid sometime probably March or April of 2018. And then a project like that probably takes 8 or 10 months, maybe a year to complete.
Any more questions to these three projects? If not, on item 5A, is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carries 4-0. On 5B, which is the North Delphine Avenue, is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Marks, thank you. Any other discussion of that? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carries 4-0. And the last one is the Windy Grove Rosser Avenue, 5C. Is there a motion to adopt that resolution?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Second.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Marks. Any other discussion?
I just to offer an appreciation to staff for bringing this forward. You know, we've got 2 projects that we have to do, and then one that we ought to do to help support our emerging, residential section out there, and then of course all the folks at the hotels that are always walking across trying to get to our restaurants. And so I very much appreciate y'all bringing this forward.
Thank you, Mr. Short. All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 4-0. Item 6 is to receive a report from Deputy City Manager Jim Shaw regarding potential funding and options for the Sunset Park Development Plan. Mr. Shaw?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, at your September 11 meeting, you received a briefing regarding potential development of a public park at the location of former city landfill. And at that meeting, we provided you what was considered a bare bones option just to get the project open and provide safe access to the public. And then you also received proposal for a more extensive park treatment. The bare bones option has a cost estimate of just under $1 million, while the full project is estimated to cost about $1.96 million. I've provided you with this packet a couple of things that are pertinent. One would be the overall plan, but as well, there's an attachment which details cost estimates for the various components of the park. And in brief, the biggest differences between a bare bones project and the more extensive project is a much greater renovation and treatment at the entrance to the park from North Delphine Avenue, Winchester, 6th Street, as well as a reworking of the recycling center area and then that area around the old, what we call the Baylor barn, where we used to compact trash, and we currently garage refuse collection trucks. And then as well, the full project plan would include a pavilion and comfort stations at the top, and has a much more extensive landscaping plan. So both of the options would include a hard surface road. Both options would include all of the things that we need to do to meet regulatory compliance with DEQ requirements for the post-closure activities that take place at the former landfill. And both options, the bare bones option does provide some signage and directional signage and that sort of thing, some treatment, landscape treatment at the entrance. So in terms of how you might go about funding these options, I think a lot is based on whether you want to take on a bare bones option or whether you want to do more to do what we would consider the full project. If you were to take on a bare bones option, I think that the council could conceivably fund this project with available cash. The council, and I've also provided information regarding the general fund committed fund balances and capital projects funds, which can be used at the discretion of council. I'm going to provide another piece of information that's just something that the Vice Mayor's asked for. I'm sorry that you haven't received it before now, but it's a description of these committed funds and the purpose that was intended by the council that originally created the funds. But at $1 million, one option would be basically to take the $715,000 that is in the undesignated capital project funds. You could take potentially some funds from your industrial park development fund. It's possible we won't have a CAFR in hand for a couple of months yet, but it's possible you would find that there are sufficient funds in your unassigned fund balance to apply to it. Another thing that I would bring up is that we've looked into the potential for a VDOT recreation access grant. I think I'm running against some advice that I gave you previously, is not to base a decision, a funding decision on whether or not you can receive grant monies. But we've had enough conversation with VDOT that we think that there is a fairly good chance that we're a good candidate for those funds. VDOT would provide up to $250,000 in unmatched money for road construction activities. We could apply for an additional $100,000, and that would be provided with a 50-50 match. So, or dollar for dollar match. The current road improvement cost estimate is about $356,000. So conceivably, we could request $303,000 from VDOT and then match that with $53,000. If the council chose to pursue the full project, and certainly the staff would encourage that, then I think it becomes a bit more tricky. And I think ultimately, it's most realistic to think that you would have to borrow funds. One option would be, because I think as you look at your available committed fund balance, you could utilize money from the industrial park funds. That's a source that will continue to grow over time. As you're well aware, that was established with Middle River Regional Jail buy-in proceeds, and we receive $650,000 a year. There's currently about $1.1 million in the fund. We'll receive this year's payment, FY18 payment, in December, and the fund will ultimately grow to about $6.5 million. I think but I don't think that we would advise that there's a lot else to be found in the committed fund balances. I think something that you might consider would be to look at a borrowing and think about the industrial park fund as a debt reserve. And the way that would work is that if you looked at other projects that you'd like to pursue, industrial park development, Sunset Park development, the revenue sharing projects that we've just discussed, other projects that might arise from the comp plan, then you may say, well, if we need the money now, we know that we will be receiving money from the jail proceeds, and we could borrow up to whatever balance we could pay for with that $6.5 million less the interest and cost of borrowing. And that'd be the most conservative approach. The $6.5 million is not going to cover what we would estimate to be both off-site and on-site improvements at the industrial park. Another approach might be to say, well, we would look at the debt reserve simply as a way of buffering a borrowing. So if you were to borrow, and I'm not suggesting it, but if you were to borrow $10 million, then you would say, well, over some period of payback time, we're going to have to come up with the other $3.5 million. The most conservative approach would say we want to raise that money now. Most localities wouldn't do that. Most localities would say if we have that sort of buffer, that we may allow that over some period of time, increasing tax values would allow us to make up that $3.5 million over a 20 or 30-year borrowing. So I think, to my way of thinking, that may be the most viable option. But where we sit today, we would recommend that you go we would get in a pooled borrowing through the Virginia Resource Authority, and our next opportunity to do that would be spring of 2018. So there is that delay in getting a project going. I would suggest that in any case, we go ahead and do enough engineering on the road work to make application through the VDOT process and keep the project moving. But I think if we do that, we've made a commitment that we're going to do some sort of a project there, whether it be $1 million or a $2 million project. I would add that I haven't mentioned it here, and I would be remiss not to mention that we realize there's also a renovation project at the high school looming. And you'll see one of your committed reserves are the proceeds that come from 5 cents of this past year's real estate tax rate increase. And so that money is kept, segregated strictly for a high school renovation capital project. So with that, I wish I could say there's a more magic way of doing this. I would say there are other things that we've thought about. Mr. Jones raised a couple of $1,000s, and that can, will do something there. We think that there's a mountain bike association locally that is interested and has done some trail work up there. There's about $40,000 in the budget that's for trail work that I think it's quite likely could be completed with volunteer labor. There may be some other smaller grants, contributions that we would get. The way I would look at that is that if you got anything like that, you would either supplement the project based on the desires of the grantor or a donor, benefactor, or that it reduces how much money you end up having to spend at the park. But I see the VDOT fund as really the most significant thing that's available to us for this project. So with that, any direction, comments, or questions that the council has, I'd be glad to field those.
I think we got a lot to think about on that.
Mr. Shaw, I just haven't been up on the hill recently, this past Saturday. I'm certainly familiar with the shortcomings of the existing road right now. Any idea what sort of road we would end up with for the 350,000, 400,000?
That cost estimate is for what's called a chip and seal road. You see a lot of times in rural areas where there's some mixture of an asphalt pavement with aggregate material that's poured and rolled into the surface. One thought that we had is that if we were able to secure additional VDOT funds and we were willing to match them, then we might upgrade that surface. But even the chip and seal is a hard surface road, I think. And then there's also cost associated with correcting some stormwater issues that are related to the road there and why it washes out.
All right, thank you, Mr. Shaw. Item 7 is to consider the introduction of 7 ordinances appropriating state, federal, or grant monies to the Waynesboro Public Schools. Mr. Hamp will summarize each ordinance, which may be introduced by a single motion. So we'd like to get all the information off the 7 of them, just have one motion for it.
So I think rather than even summarize each one, I'll simply say that the appropriation ordinances appropriate either state funds, federal funds, or grant funds, and the agenda material that each council person receives adequately describes the purpose of the grantors and the restriction on those funds. And so unless there are questions about any individual ordinance, I think the agenda sufficiently explains that. And there should be sufficient comfort in that these are not local funds.
Anybody got any comments or questions about that? Everybody's looked at the list of them. They have all 7 of them. If we're okay, is there a motion to introduce all 7 of these ordinances?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Is there a second?
Second.
They're introduced. They'll be considered at the October 23rd meeting. Communications and correspondence?
I don't have anything this evening except for a confession that the deputy clerk failed to put a sign-up sheet in the back of the room for citizen comment period. So if we could do that the old-fashioned way and pursue that endeavor without a sign-up sheet.
Is there anybody who would like to have comment time tonight? If not, thanks, everyone. Number 10 is for motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you.